1310, 95.1 FM, and its management. Attorney Nathaniel Lee, a lawyer with credibility, success, and experience. Representing people in hundreds of jury trials, Nathaniel Lee is who you want by your side in the courtroom. You've seen the rest, now hire the best. Contact Lee, Cosell, and Feigley today. And now, to address the legal concerns of the community, Praise AM 1310, 95.1 FM presents Legally Speaking. Here are today's hosts.
Good morning, everyone. This is Nathaniel Lee. Thank you very much for joining our show again today. And we have superstars, special guest, Marlon Primes, who former United States Assistant Attorney. And also, we're going to be discussing some of the basic fundamentals before I get started today. Marlon going to talk about the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act and the implication. But the number one cause I got at the law firm this week, I need to cover it real briefly because I kept repeating myself this week about 10 to 20 times. When you're involved in an accident, very quickly, let me go over the things that you need to do. The first thing, you have to check for injuries and make sure you're okay. And but the second thing, you have to put your hazard lights on and go make sure you're in a safe spot. I've had even police officers injured because there's an accident and they're at the scene and they get injured because some passerby runs into their car or runs into them. The third thing is that call 911, get police and medical attention to the scene as quickly as possible. The fourth thing is change information. Make sure you get the name, correct address. Take your cell phone out and take a photograph of their driver's license, a photograph of them, take a photograph of their insurance information, and get a picture of their license plate and all the damage to the car. And because therefore you have to document the scene. Like, for example, if the person ran through a stop sign and there's rubber on the ground where they hit their brakes too late, make sure you take lots of pictures. And the next thing is that when people say they see the accident, make sure you get their name, address, phone number, the cell phone, email address, and then just ask them, what did they see? What did they think happened? And where were they located? And the next thing, when the police arrive, one of the big misconceptions is that just stick to the facts and very briefly tell them what happened. I was northbound on Meridian Street. I was southbound east, and the light was red. I stopped. Somebody ran in the back. Be short and succinct. Don't tell them about your whole life history. Just stick to the facts of the accident, because if you do that, then you get inconsistent police reports time and time again. The next thing is that notify your insurance company. But before you notify your insurance company, contact Nathaniel Lee, your local lawyer, to give you advice on that, because the way you present this to your insurance company could result in a potentially chargeable claim. So just keep that in mind. And you got my number, 317-631-5151, if you need further assistance, doesn't matter. Now, having said that, Marlon, there's a couple things that bother me, but the biggest issue of this week, particularly as it relates to our community, if we see this massive deportation effort and eradication of constitutional norm, we have another bigger issue, the Voting Rights Act. Tell us about that and why is that significant?
Hey, good morning, everybody, and good morning, Nathaniel. One of the crown jewels of the civil rights movement was the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And the reason why that was important is that you had basically minority rule in a lot of states, particularly in the South, where you would have Black majorities, but because of poll taxes, or they would say, hey, how many bubbles are there in a bar of soap, or how many jelly beans are in the jar? And it effectively stopped a number of African-American voters from exercising the right to vote. So this was passed. And, if you look at the memoirs of Dr. Martin Luther King and, Thurgood Marshall, one of their crown achievements was the passage of this act. And so what's happening is there's two issues that I think your listeners should be aware of that are direct threats to the Voting Rights Act. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is one of the meatier portions of the act that prohibits discrimination along the lines that I discussed regarding grandfather clauses, poll taxes, and things of that sort. So we have a case out of the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals out of North Dakota, which basically indicates that there's no private right of action to file suit under the Voting Rights Act. So what that basically means in layman's terms is that if there are rules that are having an impact prohibiting people their ability to vote, you can have a civil rights group such as the NAACP or even Nathaniel Lee that wants to file a claim that this is in violation of the Voting Rights Act. Well, the Eighth Circuit basically says that Nathaniel Lee, civil rights groups, the NAACP, ACLU would not be able to bring a cause of action. The only people that could bring a cause of action would be the federal government, and that would be the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. And we all know that they've been repurposed and they're really not doing a lot in terms of enforcement. So there's a great article in Politico where you can read even further about this. And there are many commentators that say, hey, this will be the death knell of the Voting Rights Act if this particular case, it's going to be heard by the Supreme Court if they basically say there's no private right of action. So in other words, if there are violations of the Voting Rights Act and you have, a conservative administration that doesn't want to file suit, then the laws would just stay in a place. All right. So that's very problematic. The other issue is minority majority districts. And we have those all around the country in Indianapolis, in Cleveland, where I'm at. And, the impact of this is that you saw the Congressional Black Caucus. It was a very small entity and it grew to almost over 40 members because of these minority majority districts. So Justice Clarence Thomas, he's been able to persuade them a majority, or at least 4 justices, that this could be a violation of the 14th and 15th Amendments. So that case is also on the docket, and they could make a determination that creating these districts, violates the Constitution. And therefore, I think you're going to see, if it comes to fruition, you'll see less African-American representation in Congress. So these are 2 very, very troublesome cases that are on the court's docket that we have to really pay attention to.
Well, Marlon, my concern is that here in Indiana, J.D. Vance came to Indianapolis, and they're trying to rewrite history by, instead of taking the 10-year census into consideration, there is an encouragement, I guess, that this movement started down in Texas, and that's been all over the news this week when the Texas Democrat fled the state to avoid this draconian rule change to redraw a congressional district. In the middle of every 10 years, we do the census, and then you redraw a district based upon population data. So in other words, if there's, like, for example, 350 million people in America, and there's 435 seats, you do the math, and you take a calculator out, you divide it by the number of representation in Congress, and then you take the statistical average of the population base to ascertain the amount of population to go in each congressional district. So it's not complicated, but the idea is that it should be a fair representation of democracy. So in general, if the majority of people want to support Democratic candidates, then the House should be controlled by Democrats, or Republican, vice versa. So, but we're seeing what I view, Marlon, as a takeover of democracy when you have now political parties and leaders are openly attempting to defy what would be constitutional norm. I don't understand why more people are not outraged by this very thought of trying to change the population database to create Republican-friendly district. So you're trying to guarantee that the minority of the population control the majority.
It's deeply troublesome. And, one of the things that's really troublesome to me is that all these important issues that you rightly bring up on your show, they're just really not resonating, with the public. And we're not seeing a lot of our elected leaders really focusing on them as much as we should, at least in my view. So it really is troublesome. Now, this whole issue as well, you have to look at it from a historical perspective. When we were in law school, they and then the conservatives were a minority in the federal judiciary, particularly on the Supreme Court. They had this ideology that, hey, judges are legislating from the bench; they should be narrow in their scope. And now they've really turned that on its head. Now that the conservatives become the majority, it's like, well, hey, we're not going to stick to the issues that are brought on appeal. We're going to go beyond that. It really shows that the arguments that they were really putting forth years ago were just really flimsy arguments because they just didn't like the outcome. So the census issue is really important because, typically it's done every 10 years. And the whole idea is that you should follow precedent, you should follow norms. And now that there's a threat that, the voters may, elect more Democrats and they could, swing control of Congress. And what that basically means is that if the Democrats take over the House, or if they take over the Senate, they'll have the right to conduct investigations. They'll be able to ask for documents. They'll be able to hold hearings. And the administration doesn't want that. So what they're basically doing is that through the census and through what they're doing in Texas, they are trying to really tilt the scales to make sure that they stay in power irrespective. And I think, President Obama and a number of other individuals said that, hey, you should be able to win on the weight of your arguments. You don't select your voters. The voters have the determination as to whether or not they think your vision for the country is right. So it really is, very cynical, very inappropriate in my view. You don't have the right to select your own voters, all right? And that's essentially what's being done here.
So for the record, and I looked at the United States population data over the last 6 years, looked like American population had hovered right around 339, 340 million. Now it's around between 345 and 347 million. It's hard to give the exact number because we've had this mass deportation effort, and we've had people literally leaving the United States of America, American citizens. So it's going to be, it'd be educational and instructional once we get the 2030 census data, which I surmise that they'll start doing that census data probably in 2028 or 2029. But what is important is that this data shows population trends. Like, for example, Marlon, in our state of Indiana, I just don't see the population growth in our state. I just don't see it. And I see some growth in the Indianapolis metro area, but the state as a whole, there's certain parts of the state there's growth. But when I first came to Indiana from Florida, I remember back in the late 70s, the population of Florida and Indiana was very similar, around 6 million or so. Now Florida is 23 million? And so they've had substantial growth and we have not. And so the net result is that we lost a lot of congressional seats in the process. But that's the way democracy works. If our population grown to 22 million, then we would have 3 times the amount of congressional representation. You have the same representation in the U.S. Senate. You get 2 Senate seats in each state, but the congressional representation would be greatly altered. But my concern, though, is that we've seen this full-scale attack on minority rights. It's in one of the data, Marlon, that's most telling is the Black women unemployment numbers. it's getting out of hand here. I've been watching this cancer-ridden type process develop and worsen day by day. I saw starting in March or so that we were losing about 100,000 Black females from the labor force. They were losing their job. And then the last statistic by the then chairperson that kept track of this, I think Erica McIntyre, she gave accurate data that showed the Black women unemployment rate had exceeded 7.1%. And that was the highest it had been since the great COVID problem that occurred in America under the Trump administration. Well, in order to articulate facts of what happened and telling the truth, she was fired. And so my concern is, so now we'll still have the same problem, but will we ever be able to rely on the data, since if you tell the truth, you get terminated? So how in the world can now we ever say that the unemployment statistics will be accurate when we now know that telling the truth gets you fired, Marlon?
Yeah, I think it's really, problematic, because, as we talked offline, hey, these numbers are really important in terms of, reporting data about, employment, because, a lot of businesses rely upon that to determine how many people they're going to hire, what they're going to invest. And if it's not reliable, it's going to really hurt us all. And then those of us that travel internationally, it makes a big difference regarding the standing of the country, the dollar, and the purchasing power of the dollar. So, I mean, those are things. And then also, we have been the safe haven for the world's capital, because, people had reliance upon the data and the U.S. economy. So if ever the world, has a viewpoint that, hey, we're fudging the numbers and it's not accurate, it's going to have a big impact, because the reality of it is we have trillions of dollars of debt. And the way that is financed, that's financed through bonds that people buy around the world. And it's basically known as a very safe investment, because there's something known as a full faith and credit of the United States. And that's why countries and people around the world buy, our bonds to finance our debt. So if it becomes a point where people can't rely upon their data, that full faith and trust in the U.S. will diminish, and the cost of borrowing money as a country will increase. And certainly that will have disastrous impact on our overall economy. So it's something we need to be concerned about. The other issue that's really important that you brought up earlier is that the administration is saying that, hey, even though the norm is that we'll have these census and counting that every 10 years to determine who's going to be in the House of Representatives in each individual state, they want to, throw out that norm and have calculations now. Well, how can we trust that if they fire somebody at the Department of Labor for giving accurate information? How can we rely upon any accounting that determines how many representatives are going to be in Indiana versus Florida versus Ohio, if the administration is really given the message that if you provide truthful data, you're not going to have a job? So it's really troublesome, very, very troublesome.
Now, here's my problem. For your professional career, you work for a government agency formerly known as the Department of Justice. Well, since your departure, I've seen numerous accounts that now say that your Department of Justice is now called Department of Injustice. And I don't understand how so many dedicated career civil servants could make this radical change, particularly you were talking about the Voting Rights Act. Now the focus on protecting the American minorities and their constitutional right is being evaporated. I don't get it as to how these dedicated professionals could stomach these radical changes.
Yeah, and I think there are a number of people that are standing up and leaving their jobs. Several months ago, there were a number of people that resigned in a U.S. attorney's office when there was a lot of discord regarding a decision as it relates to Eric Adams. And there have been other, and that's the mayor of New York, and dismissing charges against him. And you're seeing similar things around the country where there are veteran Department of Justice employees that are leaving en masse. So it certainly is problematic. The other thing that's really troublesome, and this really unnerves me as a former federal employee, there is a defendant, and it was just reported on National Public Radio, Morning Edition. This guy was charged with invading the Capitol on January 6th. He was a defendant in a criminal case. The criminal case was pending. And you know what happened? He got hired by the Department of Justice. And the reason why that's so problematic is that in order to get a job at the Department of Justice, no matter what you're doing, you have to have a full field investigation by the FBI. I started at the Department of Justice in my 20s. So they went back 15 years. They were talking to my elementary school teachers, knocking on the door of the parents of friends that I played, pickup basketball with. I mean, they really, went through a tooth comb in terms of my background. And then on top of that, every 5 years, even though you have a job at the Department of Justice, they check your credit, they check your taxes. And it's a really rigorous process. And if you don't, maintain your security clearance, you don't have a job. And then there's a rule that if you are charged with a crime or even any sort of criminal activity, you have a duty of reporting that. So now we have somebody who is actually being prosecuted by the Department of Justice for, what I believe to be a serious violation regarding the issues regarding January 6th. And now this individual has a job. So it really is turning things on its head. The other things that I'm hearing from some of my former colleagues around the country is that, the main justice in Washington, they work in concert with the field offices, and those are 94 U.S. attorneys' offices. And there's 94 federal judicial districts. Each federal judicial district has a U.S. attorney appointed by the president and a permanent staff. And we work in concert with the individuals at headquarters in main justice on cases. And there's a collaboration regarding briefing and things of that sort. So now what's happening is that, my colleagues at U.S. attorney's offices, they're getting a brief, 10 minutes before it's due. And they're saying, hey, you sign it and you file it and you don't ask any questions. That's not the way it's supposed to be. They're supposed to rely upon the people that are local, the people that practice in front of the federal district court judges, being their eyes and ears to make sure that the law is accurate, the facts are accurate, and a lot of that's just being turned on its head. So it really, truly is, problematic. And the last thing I'll say is the Department of Justice is very different and at a different plane than your other federal agencies, because the power to indict somebody is the power to destroy. So as a consequence, there have been historical norms to make sure that there's a separation from the politics and the Department of Justice. Not to say it's always been perfect, but that norm was violated when you have the president of the United States coming to the Department of Justice and giving a political speech. That would never have happened years ago. So as a consequence, it really is impacting individuals, their faith and trust in what the department is doing. So I wish there were more, of our Congress people, more of our former DOJ attorneys that will really, raise the alarm bell that this is really inconsistent and this is really, really dangerous.
What befuddled me about the Department of Justice, and over the years, I met many of their lawyers. They were outstanding and, for the most part, unethical lawyers out trying to do good. And I had a lot of respect for them. But I was troubled by the fact that I keep reading the news, and I don't fully understand this, the Jeffrey Epstein debacle, Marla. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The whole storyline, and every day I see some picture of the President of the United States with minor girls, and this guy dies in custody that was under some strange circumstances, it appears to me. But I saw earlier on the Department of Justice head, Pam Bondi, was saying that she was going to release the Epstein file. And I was thinking to myself, and then they say they want to get the grand jury. But I was thinking to myself, if you do a grand jury transcript, that grand jury's transcript should center it upon the target, you know. And then they were trying to see whether or not it was connected to the President of the United States. Well, I don't know why the grand jury testimony would be relevant to what he did. I think the way I understand the grand jury process, it focuses on the target, and you present evidence and things like that. And so, but it seemed to me when I was looking at this particular TV interviews that the person who actually did the investigation of the decedent Epstein would have the greater knowledge of what the heck they found down in Palm Beach area.
Yeah, it really is a mess in terms of that case. And obviously the allegations against Epstein and his accomplice Maxwell are very, very troublesome. You only get one childhood, and to think that you'd have adults exploiting individuals that are below the age of consent is certainly very, very troublesome. And certainly Epstein got what he deserved, as well as his accomplice Maxwell. Now what has happened is that there's something your viewers should be aware of called QAnon. And this is really a fringe theory about QAnon, and there's a mass conspiracy regarding pedophilia, and a lot of that centers on progressives. So and unfortunately, there have been a number of individuals in the conservative movement that have made these beliefs that really don't hold any water. They've made them almost mainstream within the conservative movement. So there was a thought that, hey, once Trump rose to power, he would expose these files and it would reconfirm these QAnon beliefs that progressives were involved. Now there's allegations that there's conservatives, and again, these are allegations in terms of what press reports have pointed out. There was an article in the Washington Post indicating that the president was informed by the attorney general that his name was in these files. So then they just kind of backtrack. Okay, well, instead of releasing that, and it doesn't support these QAnon theories, and instead it supports the notion that the president had some involvement. Now we're not going to release it. So that is troublesome, because what's good for the goose should be good for the gander. And if you thought they were important and you ran on that, then you should release it. Now, the other thing that I'll say as well is that I'm very, very sensitive as a former federal prosecutor to grand jury materials being released, because your listeners have to understand a prosecutor can go to a grand jury, which basically means members of the community. It could be 18, 20 people, and they present evidence. It could be hearsay evidence. It could be hearsay on hearsay. It's just raw data. And so as a consequence, that's kept secret until and unless the grand jury decides that there's enough evidence that criminal activity took place. And then there's an indictment, and then that person has an opportunity to prove their guilt or innocence. So a fundamental underpinning of the system is that when you're making that sausage to determine whether or not somebody is guilty of a crime, that should be kept secret, especially if the person isn't indicted. And I really do believe that because, you can have situations where someone goes to the FBI, they don't like Nathaniel Lee for whatever reason, and they provide some information to the grand jury. And then the grand jury rightly says, hey, look, he's an upstanding man, and hey, we're not going to, go forward with a prosecution. That information shouldn't come out because it's just raw, unvetted data. So we got to be very, very careful about, grand jury material and just really understand what it is. It's not vetted. It's only telling one side of the story, and that's the prosecution side of the story.
See, in civil litigation, when we've encountered this process, like, you're encountering it from time to time. For example, when you're dealing with police misconduct cases, a lot of time in police misconduct cases, there's dual type litigation. One is for the criminality, and two, for civil damages. And so what we do is that in some cases, we've been able to get some of the grand jury information, others not. But what it does, it's just an investigatory tool. So once you get it, you're not allowed to share it. At least not in my case, we had to sign confidentiality agreements. But it gave me some ammunition to take deposition of the officers involved. And with that information, it gave you some additional things to discuss in the depositions. But we've not been able to use that as sacrosanct to form the basis of the claim for liability and damages. Usually we have to collect our own evidence to prove what we call a prima facie case, or prove a case at trial. And that's what we do. But I do agree 100%, because a lot of the information that is gathered in this process would never be admissible in a courtroom setting, and so the net result is that you have to tread lightly with this evidence. But, what bothers me, Marla, about this whole process is that I saw where Tulsi Gabbard, who is the director of intelligence, when this episode ripened to existence, and there's more pressure being placed on the President of the United States by these MAGA faithful, then to change the narrative for no reason at all, she said, well, let's investigate the Obama administration, which was ludicrous. It was so insulting, because Obama was last president, what year? 2016? And so, assuming that they had committed some crime, you ever heard of the statute of limitation? So you start investigating stuff 8 to 10 years after, or 12 years after well, actually in this case, it'd be 2007, 2008, or whatever they were talking about. So I'm not really sure what time frame, but it's a long time ago. And so you try to create a false narrative. And I thought it was shameful when now they populate on the news channel, and it's just such a farce to me. And it was troublesome to me that we've sunken this low in the American governmental system, Marlon. Quite frankly, it was just troublesome to me when I kept hearing these reports. And I said, are you freaking kidding me? Or you think that this have any validity? And, forget about the fact that you had Trump won, he's president. It wasn't relevant then. So now why would it be relevant like 6 years later?
It really is troublesome. Now your listeners may not be familiar with the Ohio saying of three-card Monte, where someone's constantly shuffling cards, and they're saying, hey, you bet on which card it is, and what they're doing is they're trying to distract you. They're saying little things. Oh, Nathan, which one it is, which one it is. That's essentially what they're doing. It's just engaged in distraction instead of you really focusing in on the key issue. They want you focused here or there. And that's just kind of a tactic. And I think what we have to do is we have to slow them down and say, hey, wait a minute, let's talk about this issue. We're not talking about issue B, C, or D. We're talking about issue A. And you really got to bring people back to what the issue is. And you'll see that a lot, in trials, where you ask someone a direct question and they want to talk about A, B, C, and D. The judge will rightly say, hey, it's non-responsive. And I think we have to basically have the patience to say, hey, this is non-responsive to the issues that are at hand. Now, the issue regarding that they brought up about President Obama, they tried to allege that he was involved in some type of conspiracy to tilt the scales against, President Trump when he was running for office, as it relates to, Russia interference with the election. Well, the thing that's problematic about this is that you had a congressional hearing, and it was headed by who? The current Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. And they determined that the Russia did, in fact, try to meddle in the election. So the fact that President Obama was acting upon that advice, it can't, subsequently mean that he was acting inappropriately. It just doesn't make any sense. You can't have it both ways. You can't have a congressional committee headed by Marco Rubio saying that, hey, there was interference, and then, the president acts on that, and then somehow that's problematic or political or somehow conspiratorial as it relates to trying to adversely impact the president. And the final point is that it doesn't make any sense because of the recent Supreme Court decision that had really a very broad view of presidential immunity. So how can you say there's presidential immunity as it relates to what happened on January 6th regarding the president who directed a mob to basically, essentially, ransack the Capitol, and there's immunity. And then you're saying that when President Obama is rightly concerned about Russia interference in the election that has been confirmed by many of the intelligence agencies, that somehow that's problematic. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah. Hey, producer, do we have a caller?
This is Pierre.
Good morning, sir. How you doing?
All right. Okay. Good morning, Nate, Attorney Prime. I just had to call in when you guys started talking about the, Voting Rights Act. And I just wanted to let Attorney Primes know, and I put the case in the chat, Pierre Pullins versus Kate Sweeney Bell. That's a case that I filed here in the U.S. District Court, and I took it to the Seventh Circuit. And I'm not going to go through all the things, but they essentially told me I didn't have standing to sue with all the shenanigans that went on in our local elections here dealing with Congress. What I want to tell Attorney Primes to put in his knowledge base is that our Marion County Election Board actually took down or 2006 election vote totals just disappeared off of the election board's website, and they were missing for 10 years. And then they put it back up when I sued them. Now, I mean,
well, wait a second. I didn't understand what you're saying. You're saying that they took down. I missed that. They took down what?
They took down, Nate, they took down the election vote totals on the Marion County Election Board's website, and they were missing for 10 years. Okay, meaning that the public can't access them. And if you still go, last I checked, if you go to the Marion County Election Board's website, they're up there, but now they got them in spreadsheet form, and nobody can really make head nor tails up about who won. I mean, the stuff that they get away with in some of these elections, dealing with federal elections or federal candidates running for federal office it's just mind-blowing. And in the U.S. Attorney's Office, they've got a designated person to keep an eye on the election process. I know our U.S. Attorney has one.
Well, wait a second. Did you run for a political office or something?
Stop it, Nate. Stop. I'm not going to respectfully, sir. I'm not going to do that this morning. I'm just going to move on.
No,
one
I'm
of the
saying,
things that
I'm saying you don't.
Nate, I run for Congress all the time, but I'm not announcing myself as a candidate. I just want the case is there for Attorney Primes to read through it. I'd like him to go read through it because I just want him to know what goes on in this city. Now I'm just going to move on. But to the next point I wanted to make with respect to President Obama, the claims that they made against him. One of the problems they had in that 2016 election was the cross-check program and Chris Kobach that the Democrats never talked about, never did anything about. I think Congressman Alcee Hastings even took it to President Obama and Loretta Lynch at the time. They didn't do anything about it. But that cross-check program knocked a lot of people off of the voting rolls. And that's, for whatever reason, that's never brought up. I'll get off the radio and let somebody else call in, but I just wanted to raise those two issues. But go read that case, Attorney Primes. It's unreal, the things that go on in this city and doesn't get reported. But thank you for taking my call.
Hey, I will do. I'll take a look at that.
Well, my biggest problem, Marlon, in all honesty, with our voter turnout and in Indianapolis in particular, we had like about 470,000 registered Democrat, and we only had in the last election a little bit over 215,000 to vote. So what we're facing here in our local city is we don't have sufficient political participation. And one of the biggest challenges we face, and when I talk to people from time to time, is that if they get a simple misdemeanor, I've talked to so many people about this, they think that they've lost their right to vote, or it's just mind-boggling to me, some of the things that when I talk to people about it, when I'm out into the supermarket and stuff, or I run across people, or even clients, that somehow they think that they've lost the right to vote. And then one of the most troubling things too is that we have people that serve some time in the penal system, whether local jail or the state prison, and they've been told by prison guards in the state level that they lose their right to vote. Well, in Indiana, really, once you get out, you're able to vote. So it's just, so I think the biggest challenge we face now is misinformation about the voting process. That is that we need to make sure we get more people involved in the process so we can have a better outcome, in particular, this next midterm election. And I don't feel, I know there's going to be probably going to be a mass amount of litigation that ripe into existence based upon what is occurring in real time. While we're looking at all these distractions, there seemed to be a movement afloat to change the outcome of the next coming election, not based on voter participation, but based on voter suppression, and also changing the congressional districts and things like that. So I'm concerned about that. And so I think that people should realize that at the end of the day, it's our responsibility as American citizens to exercise our right to vote. Also, is our responsibility to contact our neighbors and our friends to make sure they vote. And then if we lose the election, fine, but I don't want us to lose based upon the terrible outcome we've been having historical in our local voting cycles here, Marlon. It's just been terrible.
Yes, and your listeners around the a country should be aware that there is a move afoot, for those African Americans or those that feel disenfranchised to vote what's known as a couch, and that basically means to just don't show up. And I think I just want to let your listeners know that, hey, that's not going to make anything better. I mean, you're almost casting a vote for the conservative movement if you don't exercise your right to vote. And I know it's frustrating that, those that are living on the margins of the society, they don't really see progress. So there's a tendency to say, hey, it doesn't really matter or impact. But I think I would just disabuse people of that notion and looking at all the things that have been done in a short period of time when there's total conservative rule. They're talking about, changing the rules regarding the social safety net as it relates to public housing, as it relates to getting health insurance. These are things that are going to have a wide impact, and especially, the restrictions on student loans and the ability to go to college, the restrictions on diversity, equity, inclusion. So, those that are of humble beginnings and means have the opportunity to go to school and pay for it. So I think your listeners just have to understand that voting the couch and not participating is not an option. You're just going to maintain the status quo or make things substantially worse.
And, I'm beginning to see some significant adverse effect of these current legislation. Now, most of the folks in our community, they may see the changes in their pocketbook, in terms of buying stuff at their local grocery stores, and they see a bump in pricing and things like that. Now, we have the introduction of these tariffs, which result in a cost sharing between you and the purchasers that come purchase items coming into our country. But the major problem that I'm seeing, Marlon, is that in terms of our workforce, there's less, particular in our neighborhood, our profession, legal profession, there's less Black lawyers coming out of the process now. And this has been rather quickly a change in direction. And I'm concerned about that. And I think a lot of people don't keep the main thing. The main thing, that is that we have to protect ourselves in a democracy to make sure that we're treated fairly and that we have equal access to successful careers. And I think that we're losing sight of this because when there's this constant attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is just saying that you want to be fair to people, that we're missing the point here. We're allowing our direction of our country to go in reverse and without really challenging it correctly. And I think that you could be upset about it, but at the end of the day, you got to make sure that you're out there encouraging people to vote. And that's the only way we're going to get out of this change in direction of the country.
Yeah, you just have to recognize that, hey, I know it's frustrating, those of middle class or modest means, or even all of us, there's a feeling of apathy. There's a feeling that your vote doesn't make a difference. But, what's happening in a relatively short period of time where you have one party control in Washington, you can see a lot of disastrous impacts. So this should be, exhibit A, B, and C about the importance of us, participating in the process. And not only individually, but it's important that we educate, our family members, our friends, our fellow church members about just the importance of registering to vote and participating in the process. And, to kind of bring the conversation back to the Voting Rights Act where we started at, you need to educate people, hey, where is your voting precinct? What is your voting plan? Where is your confirmation that you're registered? I know a lot of people are active in social media, and if you really want to fight back against this administration, instead of just talking about it, hey, maybe having a list, hey, I vote. And I'm going to tag X number of people that are also voting. And hey, this is how we feel about how things are going. That is what's going to capture people's attention.
And the other aspect about this that our callers mentioned, I also talked about, was the rising cost of living now, Marley, is becoming out of control. I have so many clients and people that are talking about the cost of rental increase, the food prices are going up, and there's no relief in sight. If you have a fixed income and your cost of living increases by 10%, you're going to be running a deficit. So how do you do that? Well, most people use their credit cards. And I've had numerous people come into my office, their credit cards are now maxed out, Marlon. And so there's no relief in sight because these tariffs, I think, are just terrible in terms of it driving up the cost. And on top of that, we still were recovering from the pandemic, and in our city, we see this massive rental increase because the corporations have purchased all of, or at least they're trying to buy all of their properties. And so what they do that, I was talking to a lady just 2 weeks ago. She's paying for half double, 22.50 a month. That's obscene. I mean, just 6, 8 years ago, that would have been 8.50. So prices almost triple in this short period of time because we're seeing changes in our democracy at the top where the goal now is to favor billionaires over the typical consumer. And that's where we're headed.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's not a week that doesn't go by that, someone's calling me or calling my friends and family members that, have the good fortune of owning their homes about selling. And I think, you're right. It's not your imagination. There is a national move afoot. You have investors that may be in New York or other parts of the country. And what they're doing is they're going to foreclosure sales, and they're buying up properties, and they're just doing the bare minimum in terms of repairs, and then they're turning it over and getting rental income for it, and they're putting all these houses together, and they're buying and selling and making a substantial profit. So and if anything, the cost of housing is going to go up. So it's something that's very troublesome. The other thing that kind of goes to our conversation is that what's going on right now is that there's a real attack to the social safety net and the promise that we had after World War II and the Great Society programs of Lyndon Baines Johnson to give people a hand up. There was government policy to encourage individuals to get their own home. You have agencies that were created in order to make it easier for people to, buy homes. And also, you had, enforcement by the U.S. Department of Justice regarding the practice of redlining, where we were paying less to get, we're paying substantially more, and we were limited in the areas that we can get mortgages. So those are things that add to the housing crisis as well. So again, this is just further evidence that we really need to really pay attention to the news. We need to pay attention to some of these benign, theories about, hey, we want limited government. But hey, a lot of these governmental entities have an important purpose. And when you eradicate that and you let people go and you fire people on a mass scale, it's going to have a disastrous impact.
Yeah, it's kind of sad, particularly my senior clients, they have trouble getting through the Social Security Administration. I have other folks that were just trying to get documents from IRS. I mean, it's just, there's a terrible backlog on federal services now, and it seems like there's no end in sight. I mean, you had this Doge come in, Marlon, just start cutting people and not realizing the significant services that these government workers provided. And so now we're seeing this massive backlog in terms of basic services with no end in sight. I'm not sure what the heck we could do about it other than wait until the next election. And hopefully we win the midterms to stop some of the crazy things I'm seeing occurring every day.
Right. And I really just want to, advise people, you have to look at some of the legislative history for the Social Security Act that was passed in the 1930s, where people that are in their 60s and 70s are out, homeless or they don't have any basic income. These are what these laws and programs were designed to eradicate. And if we really forget that, we'll return to those days. So it's really important that we make sure the gains, the sacrifices that were made to get fair housing passed, to get Social Security passed. I hope, I'll never need food stamps, but I want to have that safety net in there in the case I, lose my job or someone that I know loses a job. So we got to really be careful about that social safety net, making sure that it's there. For those that are in need, so they're able to bounce back and become productive members of society. So I just really feel as though they really pit poor people against one another, and we calling each other lazy without understanding that sometimes, through the grace of God, it's not I, but it's somebody else, and they need a helping hand. So if we attack that social safety net, we don't really realize the importance. We're condemned to the past mistakes that our forefathers had to endure before this legislation regarding Social Security, regarding fair housing, regarding food stamps, public housing, before those things were enacted.
Well, thank you all for listening to our show today, and thank Marlon for these excellent comments. One announcement I need to make: my good friend Gino Shelton, folks, is having the Circle City Classic concert on September 26th at Clues Hall. Make sure you look on Gino's website and join us there, because I always try partially sponsor this event because I think it's important entertainment for our city, and also it gives us a chance to relax and have a good time. So thank you, everyone, for listening in, and thank you, Marlon.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.